Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be speaking here in Leipzig about some of the investigations we did. I work for Knack, a Belgian weekly magazine. And next to that, I'm also a member of ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, set up some 20 years ago by Chuck Lewis, which started as a network of some 75 journalists, meanwhile has grown into a network of some 200 journalists. So what's the deal? My magazine pays my salary, but at the same time, I work, let's say, 1 time per year on collaborations with ICIJ. ICIJ itself also has a staff, just a bit over 10 people. It's a very small but very successful non-profit organization. And when doing investigations, usually they go for stories that adhere to 3 criteria. We are looking at topics of global importance that reveal systemic problems with the idea of achieving concrete results. Now, if you look at some of the recent projects, you see that they fulfill all of these criteria, from secrecy for sale on the left top, also known as offshore leaks, through LuxLeaks, which you just heard about. So in 2 words, LuxLeaks was about secret tax deals that companies, over 350 companies worldwide, made with the Luxembourg tax authorities. As a result of these secret tax deals, these companies managed to hardly pay any taxes in Luxembourg, really down to sometimes even less than 1%. As a result of that, many states all around the world lost hundreds of millions of revenue coming in. So it's exactly that what was exposed by our whistleblower, Mr. Deltour. Then came Swiss Leaks, an investigation about secret Swiss bank accounts with HSBC Private Bank in Geneva. And as you all might remember, in April 2016, we launched the Panamapapers. Now, what was the story? First, I'm going to be talking a bit about the story itself, how we came about it, and then some ideas regarding whistleblowers. Now, it was a colleague of ours from Süddeutsche Zeitung who suddenly got this strange message on his screen. This is John Doe. Are you interested in data? Ask any journalist. Yes, of course he was interested in data. Very interested. And then the source had bet there are some conditions. My life is in danger. I will only use encryption to talk to you, and we can't meet. And the source obviously remained anonymous. By the way, the name John Doe is in the British language something like, yeah, an anonymous source. It's not his real name, obviously. This was the result. Some 1 year later, newspapers all over the world, TV broadcasts, published a story of the secret tax havens. 21 tax havens were named in this scandal that evolved around a leak of no less than 11 million documents that came from one law firm, Mossack Fonseca, a law firm based in Panama that helped setting up offshore companies. It was in several ways quite a historical investigation. First of all, it was the biggest leak in history. Just look at all the red dots and compare to the other black dots that you see on the left on the screen. The Cablegate, WikiLeaks, offshore leaks, LuxLeaks, Swiss leaks, they were all relatively small leaks, but now there was this huge amount of 2.6 terabyte or 11 million documents that journalists got at their disposal, mainly consisting of emails and Excel files. It was also historic in terms of media collaborating together. No less than 376 journalists during 1 year worked on this leak, representing over 70 countries. On the picture you see on the right down corner, the building of Süddeutsche Zeitung, the German newspaper, where the project was kicked off in September last year. And on the left you see the 2 Obermeier journalists, and in the middle Gerald Ryle. He's the director of ICIJ. So what was the leak about? As I said, documents about setting up offshore companies. Here you see one of the leaked documents. Here's another one. Bottom line is we are talking about offshore companies, and they have 2 characteristics. One, they're set up in a country with low taxes. But 2, and even more important, offshore companies give you the possibility of anonymity. If I in Belgium go and register a company, I leave traces behind. My name is somewhere on documents, but not so if you do it in some tax havens. Experts that we spoke to said very clear, offshore companies are used to hide things, which doesn't have to be illegal as such, but when you are hiding things for tax authorities or especially for police, it might become problematic. As long as you declare the funds that you put in the offshore company, as long as you declare the offshore itself, and as long as you manage the company according to the rules of the game, there's no problem. But in the 11 million documents, we found clear evidence that these three conditions are not always met. So as I said, Mossack Fonseca was the firm where these documents have been leaked from, or where they originated from at least. And these documents show, very interestingly, the growth and decline of setting up offshore companies. No less than over 200,000 companies were named in the Panama Papers, all set up between the 1980s and 2015. Interesting is that we could see which are the most popular tax havens used by Mossack Fonseca, with a number one, the British Virgin Islands, followed by Panama, the Bahamas. As you might recall, there's another leak that was recently published, the Bahama leaks, which is a bit different from this in terms of the type of documents. In the Bahama leaks, we are talking about the leaked documents from the corporate registry of the Bahamas, but it comes down to the same idea of having offshore companies in order to guarantee anonymity. This was the office of Mossack Fonseca in the British Virgin Islands. Is one of the most popular addresses in terms of having offshore companies registered, right above the tourist boards. Now, some more facts and figures. I told you over 200,000 offshore companies were mentioned in the leak. What is also important is the role of intermediaries. If I was a rich guy and I wanted to hide some money, for instance, black money, from the authorities, I would not directly go to Mossack Fonseca. I would work through an intermediate. This could be a bank, this could be a financial advisor, an accountant, a lawyer, etc. Now, interestingly, we also found a lot of very high-profile people, including 12 country leaders, 140 politicians and top officials, etc., etc. The role of banks can't be underscored enough. What we noticed very clearly is that often offshore companies had been set up in order to conceal the real owner of a bank account. And this was clearly by the fact that we found over 15,000 offshore companies set up by banks. Here you see some of the world leaders who are actually involved in the offshore business. And maybe you recall the fate of Mr. Gunnlaugsson of Iceland, former prime minister, who had to step down just a few days already after the publication. But he was definitely not the only country leader involved. Now, I told you, some banks played a role. Number one was Experta, which was a Luxembourg subsidiary of a Belgian banking group. They set up no less than they helped setting up over 1,500 offshore companies. Good news is that some of the data has been released by ICIJ, has been published online, such as general company information that you would find in a normal company registry, such as who is actually the owner of an offshore company, who was the address, who are the directors, etc., etc. Not all the 11 million documents were thrown on the streets, though, although tax authorities, for instance, knocked our doors to ask for them. This was a deliberate choice, as we journalists see ourselves as having the role of showing the problem to the public, but not becoming an informant of the government. The impact was huge. I know sometimes people say, yeah, what does it matter publishing all these stories and scandals? Nothing is going to change anyway. I don't agree. I think just half a year after the publication of the Panama Papers, already many things have happened. In Iceland, Malta, and the UK, angry people took the streets, protested about the facts that were revealed in the publications. As I told you, the Icelandic Prime Minister resigned. In Spain, the same happened with a minister. There was even a guy of the ethical committee of FIFA who had to step down. Next to that, new rules and measures were announced by several governments, such as the British one. Tax authorities asked journalists for information and launched new tax investigations. But not only tax investigations were initiated, also investigations by anti-money laundering units, by banking supervisors, by parliaments, such as in Belgium, for instance, or by prosecutors' offices in many countries. It was also a blow to the organized crime world because obviously offshore companies also had been used to money launder. So, for instance, in Uruguay, the police arrested several people suspected of money laundering for a Mexican drugs cartel. I already told you that several new legislative proposals have been initiated, also in the US, Australia, Germany, and the European Parliament set up an inquiry committee where only last week we, 5 journalists of ICIJ, were asked to testify, where we discussed for 3 or 4 hours the findings of our investigation, and where the idea of whistleblower protection or the necessity for a European whistleblower protection was very clearly on the table. It was really the topic that came back all the time during the questions of the members of European Parliament. Now, what does John Doe himself say about why he leaked? He actually, he came out about 1 month after the publications with a declaration in which he did not reveal his identity, but in which he said why he did it and what's the future. He said, I did it because serious crimes went unpunished and people have to answer for their roles. So that's his motivation. He also explained why he remained anonymous. He said, I would be willing to give these 11 million documents to the authorities so that they can continue their investigations. But if I look at what happened to other whistleblowers, I see their lives have been destroyed. And then he named some people, Bradley Birkenfield from the UBS affair, Antoine Deltour, who you just heard speaking. So basically what Mr. John Doe says is that he wants better whistleblower protection. He asked for immunity from government retribution. Now, there was quite some pressure on journalists. In Belgium, it was quite okay. The Minister of Finance, he asked our documents. We explained that we were not going to give all the documents, only the ones that had been published on ICIJ's website. In other European countries, especially Finland, the pressure has been more high. So here you see my Finnish colleague, Minna Knus-Galan of the public broadcasting YLA. So what happened is that the Finnish tax authorities claimed the Panama Papers and also the editorial material of the journalist. They sent an official letter to the media company and to the home of the journalist. International media wrote about the case. It turned out to be a good strategy because Finland, which is #1 on the World Press Freedom Index, of course, had to deal with this situation. ILA answered no to the authorities' claim. The authorities could continue with the claim, so ILA had to take the case to court. The Administrative Court of Helsinki, where at this moment the case is pending. The verdict might come next summer. So the answer to the question, do the journalists have to hand over the documents? Yes or no? So I think it's a very important case that we all should be looking at from a European perspective, because it might become an important precedent. So far for my short presentation into the Panama Papers. Thank you very much.